covering up my location. It's currently 48 degrees, but as you can see, it's going to plummet, and it's only going to get to this warm again on Thursday. So going to enjoy the somewhat warm air while it lasts. Because while it's projected to happen on Thursday, that's the only time in the next week where it's really projected to get this warm, and it might not happen again. And I just realized that I kind of left the house in a rush, so no sweatshirt for me. No sweatshirt for me. That just sucks. That's why normally I don't like to make these videos until after, but you wouldn't have believed me most likely if I didn't show you the temperature. So, yeah, that's the sun. It's currently in a more southwesterly position, close to sunset, than really ever. It's setting, but it's setting like a lot earlier than it normally does. It's currently 4:03, and the sunset today is actually 4:30, which is crazy to think there's actually 4 minutes before the earliest sunset occurs, and 1 minute after, and 1 minute after the solstice. But keep in mind, the sunrise time is still relatively early at 6:49. We still have 29 minutes more to lose on that. But it's true. The sun is getting dramatically closer to the Tropic of Capricorn, what's going to hang out there for a few weeks, and then it's going to slowly come back up north until it begins to become a bit more rapid in February. So here's the thing, though. So right now we're actually in a bit of a cold period. Now, if you're wondering the climatic conditions here before, because I do want to go over them. So, time for your boring overview. So, we had a pretty intense summer. There was a pretty bad heat wave throughout August that basically caused it to get pretty warm, though not as warm as it always does. And August 27th actually got to 93 degrees with a heat index of over 100. So who would have thought that it would get to only 57 degrees just a week later? Well, the answer is that wound up happening. And I'm going over this because, unfortunately, the circumstances that wound up leading to this dramatic cooling are actually quite tragic. And and I want to get it off the chest now, because otherwise I'd have to bring it up later, which nobody likes. So, August 28th was a bit of a cooling day. It was still 79 degrees at midnight, but that would be the high. As the temperature throughout the days only got to the mid-70s, which was honestly quite cool. Even during Henri, it maintained itself in the upper 70s, lower 80s, and with those very high dew points, 80-degree dew points happened this year. Thankfully, though, they did not coincide with very high temperatures. Then the dew points were a bit lower in the lower 70s. Which is actually really a lot lower, because a dew point of 70 versus a dew point of 80 makes a huge difference. So, I'm shivering. So what wound up happening was that it would then get cool, but then it would warm up, where you would have lows like in the mid 60s that would move into the upper 60s and lower 70s even, and 2 back-to-back days with highs in about 84, 85. But honestly, they weren't super intensely warm. And honestly, I felt that the end of shorts was coming up. Now, that wasn't the case, but at the time, I believed it to be, because there weren't really any warm days projected that wouldn't be unbearable. Now, what wound up happening, though, was that on December 1st, you would have a high temperature of only 74, which was unnatural, in the low was 68. But the high temperature would actually occur at about 10 p.m. due to Ida. But Ida would bring a dramatic cold front along with it that would really be that would really show that fall was coming. So, first of all, we have to get the sad part of Ida aside. After Ida killed 20 people as a tropical wave in Venezuela, Ida then rapidly intensified into a Category 4 hurricane and struck Louisiana. Nearly 40 people died in the South due to its impact, and millions of people lost power. Ida then seemingly slowed down its intensity, as it did not cause casualties in Tennessee. But merging with the frontal system, Ida's intensity picked right back up as it crossed into the northeastern United States. The Mid-Atlantic saw 3 deaths, but the Northeast saw 54 deaths. And this was due to the incredible rates of flash flooding. 3 inches of rain, more than that, actually, in an hour falling on New York City. But unlike Henri, the flooding this time actually ravaged through basement apartments, hence why so many people died. I guess it also has to do with the fact that I think for Henri, New York City was actually on tropical storm warning, I'm pretty sure. So a lot of people were evacuating. And the wind wasn't as bad as expected, but the rain was a lot worse than expected. My face is freezing. With Ida, though, you had all that, and not only that, but I have a feeling that people were coming up from Louisiana to hunker down in New York, thinking that they would be spared. But unfortunately, they were nowhere even near spared, because nobody was prepared for this. But Ida struck with unprecedented flash flooding rates, as well as spawning a fair amount of tornadoes. There was a tornado death in Pennsylvania. There were some strong tornadoes too. And what's gonna happen with this kind of event is that you're gonna have a cold front. But that Thursday only got to 61 degrees, with the high of about like mid-70s again. The next day, though, got down to 57 and was that polar plunge that everybody was looking forward to, because you would finally have a bit of a remorse from the summer, which doesn't happen very often. I'm shivering again. So, blah, blah, blah. It became more commonplace that it would hit the 50s. But what about the next step? The 40s. Well, that would take a bit more waiting, but it would happen on October 1st. Basically, after yet another warm period of up and down temperature-wise, there was finally a day where this period began to break apart, as Wednesday the 29th got down to 55 degrees, which, I mean, hey, there was a day in mid-September where it got down to 55. Exception was, this day had a high of 77. Whereas a lot of the other days that got pretty cold at night, cold is what I'm currently feeling, a lot of these other days that did that wound up, well, let's just say, you know, having high temperatures. You know, like the high temperatures were high. But this day had a high of only 69, and was probably the first day since July 3rd not to actually experience a high in the 70s. The next day had a high of about 66, and the low that night was actually 54. And then the day after that, you finally had your 49-degree day with a high of about like 68, 69. But then the next day, you had a low of 49, and then a high of 76, and it's back to being hot again. It got down to 55 at night, and then the next day, 78. And there you go. Well, looks like you're back to summer again for October. But all you really need in October is a strong cold front, and then you can pretty much get back down to average. You might be built up again, and another cold front shoots you down. It's incredible how effective this system works. All you need is an intense thunderstorm, and October had a lot more tornadoes than average. Actually, it's double average, and it possibly broke a record. And that's before you even factor in the fact that October of 2021, the NCEI data isn't even out yet, or NCDI. So, you know, And considering the massive raises that we've been having on this, I mean, August just came out and it increased the total from 100 and like about 100 exactly up to 148. It's truly impressive how it works. And I'm cold. Did I tell you how cold I was? Anyway, I know that's annoying, but I am freezing right now. So then in November, though, things began to get worse. Temperatures began to plunge down to the 30s in the beginning of November, and this is where it gets serious. Highs would wind up going back to the mid-50s, which honestly was a pretty cool low back just a few months beforehand. But that was because of a cold period which would eventually end. We also understand that like sometimes with the nor'easter could raise the temperature, but then it would fall afterwards. But to slightly less of a margin than it was beforehand, slightly cooler. But you know, and that's why on November 12th, where you had a warm night, and the day warmed up, but then the night began to cool off. But then the next day they got to 61. But I believe that this is the last time it hit the 60s. And it probably, not probably, and it might be the last time until the spring. That's the scary thing, is that when you're in these November cold waves, unlike a March cold wave, in March, it's eventually going to have to warm back up at some point. But in November, it could just be like this, like your reality for the next few months. It's also why I hate a preseason heat wave, but heat waves can clear faster than cold waves, especially when a cold wave strikes in November, because you have a low-lying angle of insulation. At least with a March heat wave, intense insulation will always win in the long run. But if you don't have intense insulation, then that's also going to win in the long run. There was actually a day once where we had a low of about 41 to 43 and a high of 70. I think this is the 9th of November? And honestly, that 70-degree heat was very hot. But, that's what can occasionally come down to in November. But that's probably also going to be the last time, because it kind of marked a settle into a heat wave. That night only got down to 52 as well. But so, yeah, settle into the cold wave, I mean. But then last Saturday night, something happened. It got down to 29 degrees. Again. Actually, not again, because this is the first time it happened. But why I'm saying this in particular is just because, it was the first time where it got down to the 20s. It was below freezing yet again. And the high that day would only be like 46 degrees. It would be cold, and this is what I'm making the video about. So last night, it was actually kind of warm at night. Yesterday wasn't super, super hot. Can't actually remember what the high temperature was. But I know at night, it began to warm up. And this morning, it actually got to the mid-50s in the morning. But by the time I had to get up, to go to school, it was raining, it was 48. It would warm to 52 during the day, but now it's on that plunge downward. It's going to hit freezing tonight. And then there's going to be nights where some of them are below freezing, some of them are above freezing. But the days are pretty set in stone. They're not rising above 50 degrees, except for this one where they are still saying the high is 53. And that could wind up being the last high temperature. That's just how winter works. Now, 2020 to 2021, I will say, was a bit of a weird winter in the sense that we didn't actually have a super big Arctic plunge temperature-wise. I mean, our low temperature of the year was only 14 degrees with a wind chill of actually exactly 0 degrees in Fahrenheit. But while that wind chill was certainly cold, generally we've seen a lot colder, especially with the air temperature. Now, the thing is, though, is that with is that with the winter, generally have some warm days. You know, sometimes in the aftermath of a cold wave, you can actually see the temperatures get up into the mid-60s sometimes. And, you know, you can sometimes see in the winter, as a matter of fact, sometimes temperatures can, you know, get really high. I mean, 2018 here got to 69 degrees, and out in New York City, where I was, it was 78. Now, I was in New York City at the time. I wasn't there when it got quite to 78. The high temperature while I was there was 75, and honestly, it was just like really weird. 2019 also had that. Most winters you see it warming up. So how come that didn't happen this winter? Well, two reasons. First of all, in the aftermath of a bad cold wave, it can sometimes warm up by a bit. Well, we didn't really have a super bad cold wave this year. I mean, if the lowest temperature of the year was only 14 degrees, I mean, that's not a super bad cold wave. I mean, it could have been a lot worse. And honestly, you know, we had catastrophic blizzards that we had to worry about in February, but not the cold. This winter was a winter that I would say was snowier, but warmer than average. And it wouldn't lift until a winter storm came through, but even then it only got into the mid-40s. Now, it did get up to about 53 degrees during the winter, during January and February specifically. It happened on January 2nd and 14th to hit the 50s, and then again on February 16th, and then also on February 27th. Now, the winter actually did see some pretty impressive temperatures. Christmas, which is undeniably in winter, did get to 60 degrees during that storm. And as far as after that, you know, in March, some people say the spring, but the second week of March was actually pretty warm, and March 12th in particular did get to 68 degrees. You know, honestly, it did get to 68 degrees. But, you know, that's not the point. And just a week after spring started, it got to 82, though that was undeniably in spring. That was in March. You know, so again, it can warm up, but you need certain circumstances that if you don't have like a big cold wave, you can't really have. And honestly, this cold wave is starting to become more notable. Might get a Wikipedia section, not an article, you know. Kind of like the mid-November blizzard. It has a draft on Wikipedia, but I don't think it's going to get published. Even though it, you know, I think the 11 tornadoes we saw in our area were from that blizzard, as a matter of fact. This is a rainstorm, but again, can't be totally sure because the draft seems to have been abandoned. You know, it's a painful story on Wikipedia. You'll see that the more notable events wind up getting the drafts improved quicker, whereas the more questionable events seem to be stalled out. Okay. And that was all for the video. Hope you enjoy. I will keep you informed on how brutal our winter continues to be. I will do more temperature checks like I did in the beginning of the video. Definitely that those temperatures can be bone chilling at points, especially if you don't have the proper equipment. See, all I have is a long sleeve shirt, but notice how I don't have a sweater underneath it. It gets hard. It gets hard. You'll slowly begin to see me dress in more and more layers, particularly if we hit a really bad cold wave. And honestly, with these cold waves too, you don't know the duration that they're going to be in. So when a really bad cold wave hits, you know, the heat wave, for example, generally they can be offset pretty easily, even if you're in a mega block. All you need is like some storm to come in or some other system. With cold, though, that's not always the case, because the worst part is that something can be harder for a storm to come through, because, you know, if once it gets to negative 85 degrees, then there's no moisture in the atmosphere. And honestly, it gets very hard to have precipitation really below -4. So, I mean, honestly, it can get harder for these warm fronts to get through, so that's why.